All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another week in our virtual reality here. I'm Becca Bertrand, the Executive Director of Newport Film, and we are just thrilled to be with you again, hopefully in the comfort of your safe and healthy homes with another great week of documentaries. Before we get going with the Q&A, I just want to give a big thank you to the amazing people who helped to make this screening this week of Chasing Coral happen. First, we want to thank 11th Hour Racing, who was with us there at the 2017 outdoor screening of Chasing Coral. And then they offered some incredible support so that we could show this film a few years ago to over 1,300 middle school students. So we're really, really excited to have brought it back into your homes for Earth Week. We also had the awesome opportunity to partner with Aquidneck Island Earth Week, which is a really, really interesting coalition of about 15 different nonprofit organizations across Aquidneck Island that are now offering all kinds of digital and virtual Earth Week offerings. So follow them on Facebook and check out the rest of the events this week because there's still a few more to go. But with that, without further ado, I want to introduce the amazing film subjects of Chasing Coral and Newport Film's incredible artistic director and co-founder and also executive producer of Chasing Coral, Andrea Van Buren. Andrea, take it away.
Thank you. This is my first virtual post-film discussion. I want to thank everyone who's joining us tonight. Also a huge shout out to Exposure Labs and to Jeff Orlowski and Larissa Rhodes, and to Netflix for working with us to bring the film to our audiences for free. You know, I read yesterday that Netflix has recently signed up 16 million new viewers. Pretty impressive. They already have something like 100 million. They're already in 100 million homes worldwide and in about 50 million homes in the US. So this expanded viewership for Chasing Coral is exceptional. So we're thrilled about that. And in case any of you haven't seen Chasing Coral yet, I'm just going to read a quick bio for both Richard Vevers and for Zach Rago. Richard, so in addition to being the force behind Chasing Coral, Richard is also the founder and CEO of the Ocean Agency, which is a nonprofit organization that supports and accelerates ocean science and conservation through creativity, technology, and powerful partnerships. We'll hear a little bit more about that as well. Zach Rago's passion for coral reefs began in the Hawaiian Islands, where he spent his childhood summers. His infatuation with coral led him to a position at a local aquarium, and then to the organization Teens for Oceans. Zach now has a degree in evolutionary biology and ecology from the University of Colorado, and is growing coral in Colorado, apparently at a farm. So we're excited to hear from him. So a couple of questions straight off for Richard, who has apparently recently moved to Newport. Can you tell us a bit about the mission and the strategy of the Ocean Agency?
Yes, absolutely. My background is advertising. So 10 years of advertising in London until I had a terrible meeting. We were discussing toilet roll and I suddenly decided to do a career change in that moment, and became an underwater photographer. And at that stage, I had very few real understanding about the issues going on with the ocean, but I quickly learned about it and soon realized that a lot of the issues are around lack of awareness. 99.9% of people don't dive and probably never will. So I decided to then sort of bring my old advertising friends back together, and we set up a not-for-profit, which was all about revealing what was happening underwater. And that's really been the basis of the Ocean Agency, is using communication and advertising skills to bring, to really generate support for ocean science and conservation.
Got it. Now, you had mentioned that you started this organization in Australia when we spoke earlier, but tell us about your new home base and why you decided to come to the US.
Well, for me, Australia was great while we were sort of just revealing the issues. So we were working on taking Google Street View underwater, and then we did a global survey of coral reefs with the University of Queensland. But if you then want to really get into conservation, America really is the home for that. The culture of philanthropy makes it possible to do really sort of ventures like the Ocean Agency in a way that isn't possible anywhere else. So I moved over here sort of 3 years ago, was based in Washington for a little while, and then fell in love with Newport and moved here a year ago.
Wow. And where specifically are you based now? I hear you have a collaboration with a local university.
Yes, so we bought a house a year ago in Newport, but we're sort of working out of the University of Rhode Island's Bay campus. So we just moved in there and then had to quickly move out because of the pandemic.
That's right. So the rest of your team is obviously working remotely. Where are they all based?
Yes, we have a remote team. Sort of, we've got someone over in London, we've got someone over in Florida, we've got someone over in LA, and a couple of people over in Newport. And we're looking for sort of expanding the team in Newport as well, sort of over the coming years.
Got it. That's great. And you have a connection, I hear, to the Volvo Ocean Race and to 11th Hour Racing. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, well, what's fundamental to the Ocean Agency is the partnerships, sort of powerful partnerships that can make a difference. And for me, the key thing we're missing in ocean conservation really is excitement and positivity. And working with a partner like the Ocean Race allows us to bring in sort of a different mentality. Often as conservationists, we get focused on telling the issues, but in a way that often doesn't lead to action. We need to really bring in exciting new players to change the narrative so it is an exciting topic that people want to get involved in. And that's why we're excited to be working with the Ocean Race, because it's exactly that. This is people with the mentality of winning and doing whatever it takes to win, and working as a team with resilience and tenacity and real belief. So that's what we're hoping to sort of bring into ocean conservation through this partnership.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Zach, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as well. It seems that going into the making of this film, you already had a really solid foundation about the science of corals. What did you end up learning about coral during the making of the film that you didn't already know? I mean, so much went on.
Yeah, I think certainly the biggest takeaway is, I grew up in Colorado, so, about as far away from the ocean as you possibly can get when it comes to the US. And I'd worked with corals really my entire life, particularly within the aquarium world, where you're growing and fragmenting corals for hobbyists, people that actually take care of these creatures in their homes. But second to that, obviously having a background in science, having an understanding of the concept of bleaching and understanding that it's something that's unbelievably detrimental to the ecosystem, but not actually being able to, I guess, grasp the scale at which this, terrible phenomenon can happen. And so I think, especially at the beginning of the film, our goal was ultimately, let's go and find, the beautiful quintessential reef and try and capture it changing to white. There was never necessarily a conversation about mortality. And quite frankly, there was never a conversation about ultimately our team all around the world being kind of at the doorstep and at the forefront of what would become the largest bleaching event and the most damaging bleaching event in history. So it was the scale of it at the end of 2016 that I think really blew me away, of just how quickly things can get out of control. Given a massive El Nino and the impacts of how we've changed the sea surface temperatures. That was certainly the biggest learning lesson, was, how quickly and how massive these events can become.
Yeah, I mean, Richard mentions in the film that the bleaching phenomenon is, of course, directly related to climate change driven by carbon emissions. Can you talk about how the current administration seems to be kind of taking the situation and turning it into an opportunity to further roll back emission standards and environmental regulations, and kind of whether or not people are getting together to try to combat that, policymakers or, at that level?
for
For me, or was
For
it?
either of you, for either of you.
Over to you, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think first and foremost, one of the coolest things about the film was that, you know, with the imagery and all of the innovative technologies that ultimately Richard developed, whether it was with Catlin XLC View Survey, all of these really novel imagery techniques, for the first time ever, we actually were able to like push this story into the media, and people were talking about it, and it was in every major news outlet all over the world for a handful of months there. And I think that was the first step to really pushing whether it was policy or really, I think more so, and Richard can certainly speak more to this, but rather than even necessarily focusing on policy from kind of a leadership standpoint of countries, I think the biggest change was, as Richard said at the beginning, in the philanthropic sector. We started having people that have the resources and the funds to be able to support projects that are a necessity to protect and talk about this ecosystem moving forward, beginning to put their money where their mouth is, because people were actively talking about it, and it became a point of conversation, something that people were interested in after the 2016 events. I think that was probably the largest shift in terms of how we're thinking about moving forward, and having people that were kind of outside of either science or kind of the government, having people really begin to become invested and participate on that level has probably been the biggest change.
Well, I know that for Jeff and Larissa, a really important part of making the film was also the impact the film would have, kind of not just with the people who are interested in the environment, but to have a broader reach. And you were involved in that impact strategy. Can you talk about kind of where this film has been?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the beautiful things about Jeff and Larissa's style in making films is it's very easy to make a film and then move on to your next project. But from the get-go, they always had a goal of to kind of have an impact campaign and to make the most out of this story, and try and take that into innovative locations and share it with people that may not be your average candidate to kind of engage with this type of content. So that was certainly multifaceted. We certainly played the politics game, working on policy, using the film as a tool for people doing that work, to use it as an asset to kind of move along their own initiatives or projects forward. And then secondarily, in my side of things, was mostly on the youth engagement. So utilizing the film within classrooms and allowing a space for kids to get involved, not only with the movement of environmentalism, but to actually allow them a space to participate not only in communicating with their own local policymakers and leaders, but also to allow them to get involved with the science and give them real world projects where they can actually make a difference in their own little neck of the woods, or even more globally in terms of actual projects to help out science. Similar to what Richard's done with the Ocean Agency and having people, documenting coral bleaching around the world long after chasing coral has been over.
Speaking of youth engagement, we've been asking for questions from a bunch of the students who've watched the film. And in Rhode Island, we're doing distance learning like so many other schools are doing. So this was a great complement to their Earth Week curriculums. So we have a question for you guys from Oliver, who's aged 8. He wants to know, have you found any species of coral that thrive in warmer waters?
Well, to be honest, Zach is probably the expert in individual corals. We've sort of studied the corals all around the world. We did one of the biggest photographic surveys of the Great Barrier Reef that's ever conducted. And so discovered a whole bunch of new species in the deeper waters. There's still a lot of research that hasn't been done in sort of deeper water corals. But Zach, you can probably best answer some of the warmer water corals.
Sure. A lot of it has to do with like kind of the structure of the coral too. So to put it kind of broadly, you can think of corals as like being branching corals or mounding corals. And the mounding corals are actually tend to be a little bit more resilient. They don't necessarily die or bleach as quickly or as severely as some of the larger branching or plating corals. So that's certainly a trend that kind of holds true across the board. And then secondarily, it also comes down to kind of regionality. So there's really fascinating corals in places like the Red Sea who actually live in temperatures that would probably kill most corals that are living on the Great Barrier Reef. So based on kind of where the coral grew up, so to speak, they can actually have more tolerance or be more resilient towards that heat, just based on their environmental factors around them also. But the coral world's quite complicated. There are winners within kind of every little group, and there are also losers.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and thanks Oliver's mom for putting in that comment. So if there are any other students out there who watched the film, maybe they watched it with their families and they have questions, just feel free to comment with your age and maybe your school. If you want to tell us what school you're at, we'd love to hear from more students. We also have two people who sort of asked the same kind of question. People have said that with this pandemic, the air quality has improved. Does this crazy situation have a silver lining that we could maybe suggest changes to society that help slow global warming?
I think absolutely there's a silver lining. You know, we've never been working so hard because of this current situation. There's never been such interest in the environment.
Yeah.
And suddenly the world seeing that the world can work together is a moment in time that, you know, we may be fundamentally changing society. And so this is a huge opportunity that we need to make the most of. You know, we were making slow progress, and it was far too slow. We needed something to shake up the system. And this is something that is definitely shaking up the system. So, you know, we are going full on of making the most of the fact that you've got celebrities who aren't working, so we can involve them in these kind of, you know, raising awareness of these issues. We've got more interest from business, knowing that they need to be seen to be supporting the environment. And so it is such an opportunity that, you know, we aren't working sort of flat out at the moment as a result of what's happening.
Yeah. I have a question actually for Andrea, who, as an executive producer on the film, I want to know more about how you got involved.
Well, I was friends with Jeff and Larissa, and we screened Chasing Ice here at Newport Film. It was, I can't remember the year, it was a while ago. And that was the one that we screened out on Rose Island.
Yep. If anybody out there remembers that, no one will ever forget it if you were there. There was you guys, Zach and Richard, there was a little boat crash incident on the way there. So half the group got to the island and the other half didn't. So it lives in infamy. Newport Film history.
But there's an incredible photo from that night, which I'll show you, which Jeff and Larissa have used when promoting that film, because we got a picture of it with it said Chasing Ice on the screen as we took the picture in the dark with all the people in the audience.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. So let's see, another question I thought would be good for the kids is talking about how far north the coral reefs exist, and explain maybe how the loss of coral reefs further south can threaten marine life even here in New England, and you know, how, if there's a correlation between the two, even though they're so far apart.
And I think you know, the corals really work within the sort of the tropics. So both tropics, and they sort of adapt to the environment, like sort of Zach said. But people forget the importance of coral reefs. They are arguably the most biodiverse places on the planet. You know, when you look at their size, you know, relative to even sort of rainforests, and they support a quarter of all marine life. So they have these huge knock-on effects because they are essentially the nurseries of the ocean, and have huge knock-on effects if you lose coral reefs to all marine life. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Zach.
I think you could also just, particularly with where all of you are living, is the vast majority of these creatures that may live in places like Chesapeake Bay, for instance, they go on these yearly expeditions essentially back down into the Florida Keys, areas like the Bahamas, Cuba, whether that's to give birth or to mate, and then make their way back up. And so without these places being the thriving food sources or protective sources for all of these creatures, that does have impacts no matter where you all are in the world, because all of these things are interconnected and they do all rely on each other, even though it may seem kind of out of sight, out of mind from where we live, up in northern hemispheres and places like that. But they all do really play keen roles in each other.
And is there a chance that even portions of reefs can come back after a bleaching event?
Sure, absolutely. You can think of a coral reef similarly to like a forest fire, if you're familiar with that. You burn down a forest, then the grasses come back first, and over time, the bushes and shrubs come back, and then seedlings come back, and ultimately you get those old growth forests back. Given 2 to 5 years, you're going to have some of those simpler corals, the weedier species, so to speak, something called a cropera. And over time, the diversity and the vast different types of corals will ultimately make their way back into a reef, and it will become more and more functional over time. And we do see that even on some of the expeditions that I've done post 2016, 2017 bleaching. You can be on some of the most ragged and devastated reefs and still find recruits from the previous year. And their reproductive strategy is so interesting that coral reefs that may not have been hit by bleaching can actually be the support system and be able to reproduce corals onto those reefs that may not have been so lucky during previous years. So they certainly are capable. They're literally built physiologically to be able to bounce back. It's just a matter of, can we give them enough space between bleaching events to do so?
And have there been,
oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask another question from a student who's 13 from Middletown. Danny wants to know, how do you grow coral? And that if you grow it, can that be transplanted into the ocean? She sort of started to talk about it a little bit, but they wanted to know specifically how you grow it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can grow coral for your own pleasure in a home aquarium, or you can do it on a large scale with the intent to actually kind of fragment them back up and try and restore a reef. But really what it comes down to is corals are made up of thousands, sometimes millions of polyps. All of them are genetically the same. And so I can take a coral that might be yay big, I can chop it into 1,000 little pieces, and I now have 1,000 individual corals that can now grow and ultimately grow into a coral that will get that large again. So as long as you have nice seawater and the parameters of that seawater are all right, and most importantly, you have the right lighting conditions for them, because you have to remember corals aren't getting their food like you and I. They're utilizing photosynthesis. Their energy and their food comes from the sun. And so as long as those things are under control, you can actually grow coral quite easily. Some of them grow faster than others, but that's the gist of it.
And we have two questions that are kind of related. One person asking, what can we in New England, do to help coral? And then as a follow-up to that, could coral migrate north?
And I think the answer of what can the individual do, it's always very difficult when you're so far away from coral reefs making an impact. And it does, to a large degree, come down to sort of government action and making sure really we are sort of sticking to the climate agreement. That's so important. So making sure friends and family are supporting that kind of action. Climate action is the number one thing we need to do to protect coral reefs. The other thing we need to do is protect marine environments that are less vulnerable. So we had a project called 50 Reefs, which is all about finding the reefs which are least vulnerable to climate change and making sure we're protecting those from the local impacts of overfishing and pollution. So supporting initiatives that protect marine environments, especially a new initiative that's happening, really getting a big push this year, which is about protecting 30% of the ocean, and by definition 30% of coral reefs. Those kind of initiatives are the ones we need to really be supporting. We've got a campaign that's going to be coming out in June with Adobe that really is about supporting and showing your support for that. So, we just ask people to keep an eye out for the Ocean Agency around that time and join what will be a very fun campaign.
That's awesome. We also have a very specific question for you guys, sort of more of a comment from a group called Reef Shelter, who's joining us in the live feed tonight from New Caledonia. And they said, we saw in your movie that you came over here. We're working on protecting our reefs, and we just created an NGO called Reef Shelter. We wanted you to know. And also, are you willing to come back to New Caledonia to continue your work? And is it possible to organize a meeting?
Fantastic. And no, we love New Caledonia. And yeah, the imagery we got from New Caledonia was something that very, very few people have ever seen, sort of corals fluorescing in the incredible colors that they do literally only in New Caledonia. So we would love to go back and revisit. Obviously, we'll need to wait until certain restrictions are lifted. We would love to go back and see those corals again, because we've heard they've bounced back incredibly well. It is an unbelievable location, New Caledonia, and there is desperate need to make sure it is one of those areas that is protected.
Absolutely.
So, hats off to the people there.
Did you talk about the glowing campaign? Does the glowing campaign have anything to do with this?
So that was inspired by the trip to New Caledonia, seeing corals producing this chemical sunscreen chemical that allows them to, well, basically protects them from the sun's UV rays. And in New Caledonia, they do this in spades. They produce so much of the chemical that they were glowing in these bright yellows and the bright blues and the bright purples. And because we were the only team sort of really going there and photographing it, we thought that this was like the ultimate ocean's warning going off, and we were the only ones seeing it. So we decided to turn this into a campaign that really unlocked creativity, teaming up with Adobe, which is really the gateway to creatives around the world. And then we've been putting out challenges to use these colors to really share the ocean's warning. And it's been very successful with people like the World Surf League got on board and changed all the competitors' jerseys for one of the world events. And we have people like Kelly Slater talking about the need for coral reef restoration, thanks to sort of being able to communicate around color.
Got it. Okay. And you invented this incredibly special underwater camera. Can you just talk a little bit about how long that took to kind of conceptualize and
yes.
build?
Well, this was, when we first started the Ocean Agency, we thought, okay, let's think of an audacious idea. And the idea was, well, let's take what Google's doing above ground and let's take it underwater. So we designed the equivalent of the Google Street View car. So it was a camera, a 360 camera mounted onto the front of a military grade scooter. And off we went to do revealing underwater environments in Google Maps. And that's really led to an unbelievable program sort of with Google Education that now reaches 90 million kids sort of worldwide. Really using virtual reality as a way of educating people about these marine environments. And to do that, we had to invent this camera. And we got some great minds in really from sort of the developing military hardware to help us with this process. So
that's incredible. I'm being told by Becca that I have to start to wrap it up because we've had you for 30 minutes and you've been so nice, both of you. Zach, you said that you had some news about kind of your next steps when we were just getting on the call. Do you want to tell everybody what you're up to?
Sure. Yeah. I actually just as of yesterday accepted a position to go pursue my PhD at the University of Hawaii, which is something I've always wanted to do. But obviously, with the film and all of that, I took a little bit of a detour, but took a break from everything, and now going to jump right back into it and get back down to working with corals. So I'm really thrilled with it. And exciting opportunity for sure.
That's great. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
Richard, do you want to leave us with any last few words?
Well, it'd just be nice to sort of say, Zach is really, in my view, sort of the secret of the success of the film. Being British, Jeff Orlowski, the director, was trying to get me to show my emotions, but we're not allowed to. And it was sort of Zach coming into the film and being brought in by Jeff. Zach was working obviously on the technology and really became the star of the show. So it really was sort of hats off to sort of Jeff and Zach making the film such a success. So great to see you again, Zach.
Oh, absolutely. It's always good to see you. And obviously, none of the film happens without Richard starting it from the get-go. So truly started with two pictures and an email from his technology. And then we got the pleasure to embark on this wild journey together. And it did a lot of good. And I think more people are talking about this issue than ever. And it continues to be that way. Australia just went through its third bleaching event in the last 5 years over the past few weeks. So this issue is still happening and we need to keep talking about it. So it's great that despite the pandemic, we're able to all continue to come together and continue to share this story. So
that's awesome. Thank you guys all so much for the part that each of you played in making the film. It's been a pleasure to chat with you all tonight. We want to also let everybody out there know who's listening that next week we will be bringing you a new title for Rent. It's called Nothing Fancy, about Diana Kennedy, who is a lovely British chef who cooks Mexican food, and she's an absolute delight. So we're going to enjoy that next week. And we